Okay, hi everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the humanist theory of personality. This is the theory that was created in response to the psychoanalytic theory. And just as a bit of a forewarning, I am recording at home instead of at school today, so there is a good chance that you will get some interjections from either little Edie or the dogs. You're probably already hearing the dogs in the background. So just be forewarned. Anyway, as I said, the humanist theory of personality is, excuse me, really created in response to Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalysts. And it was created because the people who are a part of the humanist theory really truly disagreed with like the fundamentals of Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalytic perspective. They disagreed with this idea that our unconscious mind is controlling our personality. They disagreed with this idea that there was so little free will to make decisions about our future and our personality and what we will be like in the future. And they disagreed with the idea that all people were kind of inherently sick, right? So if you remember, Sigmund Freud really focused on all of these sexual fixations that would cause problems, and Adler was really concerned with like our inferiority complexes or our neuroses, and all of these things that kind of like had this message that as humans we are inherently mentally unstable. We are inherently sick in some way and need to be fixed. So humanist theory is going to disagree on all of those points. They are going to focus on the conscious experience as opposed to the unconscious experience. They're going to focus on the role that our free will and our ability to make decisions play in shaping our future and our personality. And they are going to focus on how to help healthy individuals become the best versions of themselves, rather than focusing on people that would be classically determined to be, psychologically disturbed or mentally ill or whatever. So the very first term on your note guide in relationship to this, I believe it's at the top of page 9, is just, the humanistic theory of personality. So this is kind of a brief overview of essentially why it was created. You have your two founders here, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. And then this theory is created in the 1960s, so a little bit after Sigmund Freud, and the psychoanalysts were around kind of doing their own thing. And again, it is focused on rejecting both behaviorism and psychoanalysis. So if you remember from way back in August, behaviorism is this focus on only studying observable behaviors. All of that operant conditioning and classical conditioning, that's the purview of behaviorism. So they really disagreed with that. They found behaviorism to be pretty dehumanizing. And they also, as I mentioned before, like really disagreed with psychoanalytic theory and the psychodynamic thought, and especially disagreed with this idea that people are inherently dysfunctional, right? So humanism in the 1960s becomes what we would call like the third force in psychology. That's typically what it's called too, because prior to humanism, you just had behaviorism and psychoanalysis. The key difference between humanists and psychoanalytic psychologists is that humanists really study healthy people. Their focus is not on those with mental illness or psychological disturbance. Their focus is on healthy people and helping healthy people to become better versions of themselves. And instead of focusing on like these internal, and there's Miss Edie, these internal conflicts, they are going to focus on supporting healthy personal growth. So that all of that is, really contradictory to what we've been talking about for the last several days. I do want to note right up top that despite how different humanism is from psychoanalysis. It also inherently lacks a lot of the scientific foundations that we really like to see in modern psychology. So, despite being kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from Sigmund Freud, it's going to share some of the same flaws when it comes to how the theories work. So the very first thing that Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers identified were the concepts of the self, and then specifically the idea of having a self-concept and having self-esteem. And all three of these are different, so you want to make sure you have clear and concise definitions for each of them, and a way of telling the difference between the self-concept and self-esteem. The self, in and of itself, is a really difficult thing to define. This is a definition I found online from an APA dictionary that I really liked. If you were to look up, the philosophical definition of the self, or, any other, schools of thought, you're going to get different definitions. The idea of what is the self is really kind of a fundamental question in a lot of, classical schools of intellectualism. For our purposes, I liked this definition. I thought it was succinct and to the point, and really captures what Maslow and Rogers were getting at in their version of the self. So the self refers to a person's experience as what we would call a single, unitary, autonomous being. So, an individual, that's what we mean by single, and unitary. Okay, sorry about that, folks. I relocated. The dogs and the baby were getting a little bit too loud for me, so I'm sure they were way too loud for you. Anyway, the self, as I was talking about, refers to our experience as a single entity, a single consciousness that is unitary. It's unto itself. It's autonomous. It makes its own decisions and its own choices. And specifically that consciousness is separate from others. It doesn't share space with other selves, which makes sense. I don't share a consciousness with, my husband or my kid or any of you. I have just my own consciousness to contend with. And that experience, that consciousness, it has a continuity through time and place, meaning, my consciousness extends backwards through my childhood. My consciousness remains the same regardless of where I am, in terms of geography or location. So it's continuous. Okay. And then to kind of build on that, the experience of the self includes your consciousness, so all of your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, but also your physicality, so everything you feel and touch and taste and smell and eat, as well as all of our metacognitive practices, so our morals, our emotions. All of those things are wrapped up in the self as well. So a fairly complicated entity to try and pin down with one specific definition. Self-concept and self-esteem, on the other hand, are a little bit easier to identify. These are both concepts that were created by humanist psychologists to kind of understand how we think about ourselves. Again, humanism is really focused on the conscious experience. So what am I thinking right now about me, about my relationships, about my future, rather than focusing on that unconscious experience of those things I can't access. So, self-concept is a practical evaluation of our characteristics. The most important part of building a self-concept is that it's done without emotion or evaluation. It's literally a list of characteristics, features, and traits that you can write down about yourself. So for me, it would be things like, I am female, I am 5'6", I have reddish blonde hair, I am married, I have a daughter, I have another daughter on the way, I am friendly, just a list of things that I know to be true about myself. I like music, I like Broadway. I like the Blackhawks, whatever list of things that I believe make up me. And that's all it is. It is a practical evaluation of your characteristics. There is no emotion about it. There's no evaluation of those characteristics. All of that is saved for self-esteem. Your self-esteem is purely emotional. It's purely evaluative. So once I have this self-concept built, I have an idea of who I am and what makes me me, our natural instinct is then to evaluate that. Do I like that list of characteristics, features, and traits? And that's where self-esteem comes in. Our self-esteem is our evaluation of our self-concept. How do we feel about our list of traits? How do we feel about our characteristics? How do I feel about my reddish blonde hair, or the fact that I'm 5'6", or the fact that I'm a female? How do I feel about, the fact that I'm married and I have 2 kids? How do I feel about being a teacher? How do I feel about having green eyes? Like whatever the case is. And the emotions that are attached to that create our self-esteem. Okay. So self-concept, practical evaluation, self-esteem is that emotional evaluation of your self-concept. Generally speaking, both Rogers and Maslow believed that your self-concept is really at the center of your personality, and that self-esteem and self-concept are correlated. If we believe our self-concept is positive, then we will have a positive self-esteem. We will act and perceive the world positively. Okay. And, you could have 2 people with very similar traits and characteristics and features, and you can have one person who evaluates those things positively and one person who evaluates them negatively. That emotional piece is really unique to your individual experience. So there's no rule saying that, like, if you're, a tall male or you are a thin female, you're automatically going to have, a high self-esteem or a good evaluation of your self-concept. That is completely unique unto you. But if you have a positive feeling about your self-concept, you will have a positive self-esteem, and vice versa. If we believe our self-concept to be negative, then we will build up a negative self-esteem and negative evaluation of that. We'll talk a little bit about real and ideal self in a couple of slides. So I'll get to like that other part. But for example, me personally, when I think about my list of characteristics, hand-eye coordination is not on the list. I am very bad at hand-eye coordination. I am therefore really bad at a lot of sports. And on the one hand, I personally feel pretty neutral about that. I don't mind that I'm not particularly sports athletic. When I work out, I do more individual workouts, and I'm okay with that. But if I came from a family that really valued athletic ability and the ability to play sports, I might look at that lack of hand-eye coordination very negatively, and I could have a negative evaluation of that, which would lead to a more negative self-esteem. So, just an example of how, for me personally, lack of hand-eye coordination, I'm pretty neutral about it. It's fine. But for another person, that lack of hand-eye coordination and that lack of, maybe natural inborn athletic ability could be very correlated to negative self-esteem. Okay. And those are the things that Abraham Maslow agree on when it comes to humanism. So now we're going to get into Maslow's theory, which is going to be a lot of review. We've talked about his hierarchy of needs before this semester, so I'm not going to go through all of the needs again. If you need a refresher on Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, you want to go back to the motivation unit and watch the screencast on motivational theories. And then we'll get into Rogers and his theory as well. So, Abraham Maslow, his theory is the hierarchy of needs, which we've already talked about before. And it's based on this, idea of motivation, but in this context, we're also going to look at it as a theory behind personality, where our personality is determined, at least partially, by where we are in the hierarchy of needs. Especially, like, I often think about, like, the difference between living in the psychological and safety needs and living in the belonging and esteem needs. If you are a high school student who is living down here in the physiological and safety needs, chances are you aren't going to be super outgoing and looking for tons of friends and joining all kinds of after school clubs and sports teams and extracurriculars, because your focus and your personality is going to be driven by, like, where's my next meal coming from? Where's rent money going to come from? Do I know where I'm going to be sleeping tonight? Do I have a warm coat for next winter? Versus a person who, comes into their high school career, really like living in these belonging needs. They are probably going to be much more open to new experiences, to talking to new people, to joining clubs, to trying new things, because of where they are in that hierarchy of needs. So it can change the way a person, like, outwardly shows their personality. Okay. But really, the key here when we talk about this as a theory of personality is the concept of striving to reach self-actualization. Okay. And self-actualization, the generic definition of it is the fulfilling of one's potential. I'm going to spend 2 slides talking a little bit about what it means to be self-actualized, because I think that definition, like, fulfilling your personal potential, is very vague. And I think for a lot of people, self-actualization feels like it's completely unachievable because of this really vague, definition. So what do we mean by self-actualization? So, according to Maslow, Maslow has a quote that is honestly one of my favorite psychology quotes of all time. And it's very simple, very straightforward. It reads, what a man can be, he must be. And that speaks to what self-actualization is. Whatever it is that you are capable of being, that is what you must be. And once you become that person, once you become the person you are capable of becoming, you have reached self-actualization. But what that quote is also saying is, what a man can be, he must be, but he can't be anything else. He can't be somebody he's not. He can't reach some pinnacle that isn't what he's capable of, right? So it really, self-actualization is a very personal, individualized journey of, what am I personally capable of achieving in my life? And what am I doing to achieve those things? Okay. What it is not is the idea of, like, becoming the next Martin Luther King Jr. or the next President Obama or the next Muhammad Gandhi. Like, it's not about becoming this, like, international superstar who's known for being, like, moralistic and wonderful and, like, this great speaker. Like, absolutely not. You can, like, certainly, maybe Barack Obama is self-actualized. Maybe Martin Luther King was self-actualized. But you can also be a self-actualized, like, Target employee, right? If what you are capable of as an individual, what you are most capable of is being the best, like, Target store manager on the planet, then that's what you need to do to be self-actualized. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to strive to be, the leader of the free country or anything like that. You just need to strive to be what you can be. Okay? When a person reaches that state, when they reach self-actualization, one of the fundamental things is that they are self-aware and self-accepting. And this is really, really difficult. Because it means that you're self-aware of, like, what you're good at, but more importantly, it means that you're aware of what you're not good at. You're aware of your shortcomings and where your failures are, and more importantly, you're accepting of those failures. So, like, if you are a person who I don't know, like really struggles to quit smoking, and that is a personal failure, um, then you would become accepting of that. And I don't mean accepting meaning like you would just give up and keep smoking, but accepting of the fact that this is always going to be a thing you struggle with, and it's going to be a thing that sometimes you do good with and sometimes you don't do as well with. And more importantly, therefore, like if your family or your friends start giving you crap about your smoking habit and start trying to make you feel bad about your smoking habit, it doesn't work because you already know that's one of your flaws and you've already accepted that that's one of your flaws. So other people can't make you feel bad about it. And that's the part that's really hard. Like it's easy, I think most of us can identify where our shortcomings are, but to be accepting of those shortcomings is very, very difficult. So that brings us like to this other point here, like not being paralyzed by others' opinions. It's really difficult. It can be somewhat easy to reach like esteem needs. I've become the manager at my company. I have received recognition for my hard work, and like that's great. But to take that step into self-actualization, when I am criticized by the people who work under me, I need to be okay with that and accepting of that criticism, and take note of the things that are useful to improve my performance, and just kind of let the rest of it roll off my back because it is what it is. That's, again, super difficult to do. Most people really can't handle that. And then being secure in who you are. Again, sounds easy, but it isn't in a lot of situations. So my example of a self-actualized target employee, if you put that person into a Thanksgiving meal with all of their relatives, and maybe some of their relatives are more like traditionally successful, right? Like they have high paying jobs and big savings accounts and stuff like that. A person who is self-actualized doesn't care. They're not comparing themselves to their wealthy cousins and family members. They're secure in who they are and secure in the fact that they're doing what they're meant to be doing, even though like maybe it's something that other people don't view as traditionally successful. To that end, the person in my head that really characterizes self-actualization, and not person because she's a commercial character, but Flo from the Progressive commercials, and just like how much she loves insurance and how much she loves what she's doing. Like that's kind of that embodiment of self-actualization. Like nobody could tell Flo that she isn't doing exactly what she's doing, and nobody, anytime in the commercials that somebody tries to make fun of Flo, like it doesn't faze her at all because she's just happy doing her own thing. So I know that was pretty long-winded, and not a lot of that is like stuff you can write down in your note guide. But I want to make sure that like we really talk about what self-actualization looks like for average people, as opposed to thinking of it as this some like unattainable like final step, like reaching nirvana. If I was a Buddhist monk or something, because it is definitely not like that. People who are self-actualized they tend to be problem-centered. So again, the fact that they are aware of their flaws and accepting of those flaws means that they are more able to focus on fixing them and like taking criticism and adapting and trying to figure out how to be better. They don't take, critical conversations personally. So they aren't focused on the self as much. They're able to focus their energies on a particular task, and what I mean by that is like a particular like life, long-term goal, and they're able to dedicate themselves to that thing, despite like failures and setbacks and stuff like that. And then they tend to have a few deeper relationships, very similar to Erickson's like intimacy versus role confusion, rather than like a lot of random superficial friendships. So that's essentially Maslow. The part I left out again is a description of all of the different levels of the hierarchy of needs, because that would just be pure review. And if you need that again, go back to the screencast from the motivation unit. But his ultimate goal of becoming a well-defined person is that reaching of self-actualization. Carl Rogers has a little bit different of a perspective. And what he calls his theory is the person-centered perspective. Um, so Rogers doesn't disagree with Maslow. Like, they're not in competition the way a lot of the Neo-Freudians were. He still believes that, reaching self-actualization is the end goal. That's what we're all trying to do. But he just kind of has a different idea of how people reach self-actualization. According to Rogers, you need to have experience with 3 specific qualities: genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. And specifically, like, not that you need to have these qualities, but the people around you need to have these qualities towards you. Like, you need to experience these qualities in your relationships. The first one, genuineness, is the idea that you can be honest and open about who you are, that you have people in your life that you don't have to hide your personality from. Whether that is, something as big as, maybe having struggles with your gender identity or your sexual identity or your religious or political identity. But it also is like as little as having that friend that you can safely say, like, dude, that haircut looks really bad on you. And your friend isn't going to like blow up at you and be angry. Like, you have an open, honest, genuine relationship where you guys can like share actual truths with each other. You don't need to kind of put on this fake persona around that person. So we need that. We need people that we can be our true and actual selves around. We need acceptance, which is also known as unconditional positive regard. And again, that is in a relationship, the knowledge that no matter what you do, literally no matter what you do, this person will continue to accept you and love you for who you are. Again, that sounds easy. Like, of course, I think my parents have unconditional positive regard for me, and I think I have it towards Edie, and it's easy to think about, but it goes really, really deep. Like, if you murdered somebody, is there a person in your life who would still love you and accept you for who you are? If you became a serial killer, if you did anything like crazy or illegal or bad, if you became a drug addict and stole money from your parents, would they still love you and accept you? If you decided to drop out of college and become an artist, if you did decide that you were transgender or any number of things, do you have a person, at least one person in your life, who will continue to love you and accept you regardless of that thing, whether it's a personal choice like religion or politics, whether it's a new understanding of yourself, like gender identity or sexual identity, or if it's something like crazy and illegal, like murdering somebody, that you still have a person who loves you. And then finally, a person who will show you empathy. So somebody who will be able to reflect your feelings back for you and show you understanding and listen to you when you have problems, stuff like that, and be able to empathize with the struggles that you're going through. Sounds relatively easy, but to find all 3 qualities in one singular person can be pretty difficult. Rogers typically argued that the person you are most likely to find all 3 qualities in is your mother, but that obviously is going to totally depend on your personal relationship with your family. But that regardless of who it is, we all need to have somebody. It's important to note that, like, he also would say that then could be a therapist. So he builds a therapy on these tenets as well, that if you seek out therapy, your therapist will provide genuineness, acceptance, and empathy, regardless of what you say in your therapy session. And then the other concept that Rogers is really well known for is the concept of ideal self versus real self. So we've already talked about the fact that in the humanistic perspective, the core of your personality is self-concept. And so, and then like if we like our self-concept, we're going to have positive self-esteem. If we don't like our self-concept, we're going to have negative self-esteem. The concept of ideal and actual self really build on that. Ideal self is your perfect version of who you could be. And often a therapist will ask you to write down, like, what is your ideal self? And you can, go through that perfect self-concept of, like, in a perfect world, who would I be? And then the therapist will ask you to write down your actual self, your real self. Like, who are you today? And what they will do is compare those things. Ideally, we want our self-concept and our ideal self to be the same. That's going to create this perfect harmony. Our self-concept and our ideal self are the same. Therefore, we have this really positive self-esteem because we're exactly who we want to be. Most of us have some disharmony between our actual and real self, our actual and ideal self. And so what Rogers would tell you is if you can identify your ideal self and your real self, you can begin to work towards becoming your ideal self. You can move closer to that. Obviously within reason, like if you are, a 4'11" girl who really, really, really wants to be, the next LeBron James, that's a bit of an unattainable ideal self for many reasons. And like maybe having that on your ideal self list is problematic because you're never going to be able to reach that. So in the case where like your ideal self is truly unattainable for some reason, if you're working with a therapist on these kinds of things, they're going to ask you to really like try and reframe what are attainable characteristics for my ideal self. And then again, try to merge those things closer together. Okay, and then finally, in terms of comparing psychoanalysis and humanistic theories, I kind of already mentioned it at the beginning, but they are pretty much exact opposites. On the psychoanalysis side, you have the unconscious, you have lack of free will, and you have the fact that people are mostly sick and need to be fixed. On the humanistic side, you have an emphasis on conscious thought processes, an emphasis on free will and personal growth, and a focus on healthy people becoming their best selves. So that's, in that comparison where they're the exact opposite. That being said, when we evaluate humanistic theories, a lot of the criticisms are similar to the criticisms that you see in psychoanalysis. Specifically, how vague and unscientific it is. How do we test for self-actualization? How do we create an empirical exam measuring self-concept? All of those things that can be just as difficult with humanism as it is with psychoanalysis. There also are criticisms about the idea that these theories are a little bit biased, that Maslow and Rogers sort of cherry-picked their quote-unquote healthy subjects to study, and maybe that gave them participant bias in their research studies. So maybe these theories don't apply as well to the general populace as they could. And then finally, there's a lot of criticism about the fact that the theory can come off as really naive. This focus on just be the best you can be, and everybody can reach their full potential, can be difficult for some people to accept if they are in the group of people who are experiencing psychological difficulties or, emotional trauma or any number of things. So there's a lot of people who would argue that it's a fairly naive theory of personality as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, is your humanistic theory of personality. Humanism and psychoanalysis tend to go together in terms of being the early theories of personality and the less scientific theories of personality. When we come back together, we will start talking about the other two, trait theory and social cognitive theory, which are more modern and also have more empirical evidence to back them up. As always, if you have questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Have a great day.